Have you ever noticed how loud the world has become? Everyone's talking, posting, explaining, arguing. From breakfast opinions to midnight breakdowns, our lives are lived out loud. And in all that noise, there's something quietly powerful about the person who chooses silence. Not silence from fear, but silence from strength. We live in an age addicted to attention. If you're not constantly broadcasting what you're thinking, doing, healing, or planning, you risk being forgotten. We're taught to express ourselves, to speak our truth, to be vulnerable. But what if we've taken it too far? What if, in our effort to be seen, we've lost touch with the value of holding something back? The Stoics understood this centuries ago, long before smartphones, before comment sections, before dopamine-driven scrolling. They warned us about the dangers of talking too much. Epictetus said it best, "He who masters his words masters his destiny." They knew that words weren't just sound, they were direction. Every sentence you speak is a step toward who you're becoming. And every time you repeat a complaint or narrate your pain or seek applause for your progress, you're handing your internal compass to someone else. This isn't about bottling things up. Stoicism is not emotional suppression. It's emotional ownership. It's learning when to speak and when silence says more, when to share and when to protect your energy. It's about realizing that your life is not an open stage and that your healing, your growth, your direction are sacred enough to deserve some privacy. Think about this. How many times have you shared a personal struggle only to feel worse afterward? How many times have you told someone your dream and then felt their doubt infect your confidence? How many times have you posted something just to prove you're evolving and later questioned whether you were doing it for yourself or for the reaction? When you speak too soon, you invite interference. When you narrate your wounds too often, you keep them raw. And when you constantly explain yourself to be accepted, you start to lose the quiet strength of knowing who you are without needing applause. Silence is not absence, it's presence. It's the presence of discipline, of direction, of self-respect. It's the quiet confidence that says, "I don't need to prove this to you, I just need to live it." There's something incredibly grounding about choosing not to speak when everyone else is shouting, not because you don't care, but because you care too much to waste energy where it's not respected. In a world obsessed with noise, stillness becomes rebellion. It becomes clarity. It becomes your personal shield. The Stoics believed in that kind of stillness. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, journaled privately every night, not to post it, not to impress, but to refine his character, to reflect quietly, to lead with restraint. Why? Because true power doesn't rush to be heard. It speaks when it matters and is silent when it's wiser to observe. Every time you stay quiet instead of reacting, you're strengthening your character. Every time you resist the urge to overshare, you're reclaiming your boundaries. Every time you breathe before you speak, you're telling the world, "I choose clarity over chaos. I choose presence over performance." And the more you practice this mindful, intentional silence, the more your energy stops leaking into empty spaces. You stop needing to defend your growth. You stop needing everyone to understand, and you start focusing on what actually changes your life. Action. Quiet, consistent, meaningful action. You don't need to shout to be strong. You don't need to explain to be evolving. You just need to choose where your voice truly matters. and where your silence speaks louder. So if you've been feeling exhausted by the need to be heard, if you've grown tired of justifying every emotion, if you're ready to reclaim the part of you that doesn't need permission or attention, then welcome. This is where the shift begins, not with another story, not with another explanation, but with the simple choice to step back, turn down the volume, and anchor yourself in something deeper. Let the world wonder what you're building. Let them guess what you're becoming. Because when silence becomes your practice, strength becomes your nature. And that, my friend, is where real stoicism lives. Lesson 1, real transformation doesn't need an audience. Daniel went through one of the most painful chapters of his life, divorce. A quiet one, no dramatic posts, no cryptic captions, no hashtag healing journey. For an entire year, he simply disappeared from the online world. No updates, no birthday stories, not even a picture of his coffee. And it wasn't because he was hiding. It was because for the first time in his life, he was doing the work without needing the world to see it. He went to therapy. He journaled. He read books that didn't just comfort him, but challenged him. He started waking up early, running before the sun came up, and making coffee in silence. His mornings became a ritual, not a performance. His evenings were spent alone, not lonely, but quietly rebuilding a version of himself that no one else needed to approve. And then one evening at a high school reunion, someone looked at him and said, "You seem different, steadier. What's going on with you?" Daniel didn't say much. He just smiled. And that was enough. This is the kind of transformation the Stoics understood. The kind that doesn't beg for applause. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself with fireworks. The kind that happens behind closed doors, in silence, in sweat, in solitude. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And that's exactly what Daniel did. No speeches, no statements, just alignment. We live in a time where every change is broadcast. You start a diet, you post it, you read a book, you quote it, you meditate for 3 days in a row, now you're a mindfulness expert. But real transformation, the kind that lasts, doesn't crave visibility. It craves integrity. Ask yourself, why do we feel the need to announce our growth? Why do we need people to know we're evolving, healing, doing better? Sometimes it's excitement, sure, but more often it's insecurity. We want someone to tell us we're on the right path. We want permission to keep going. But when the applause dies down, and it always does, what's left? Who are you when no one's clapping? The Stoics believe that the most meaningful progress is the kind no one notices at first. It's the subtle shift in how you carry yourself, the way you pause before reacting, the peace in your eyes when someone tries to provoke you. It's not flashy, it's not viral, it's real, and real doesn't always show up well on camera. Social media has taught us to document everything, to perform our growth, to make sure everyone sees the steps we're taking. But here's the danger in that. When you talk too much about what you're changing, you risk turning the process into a performance. You start measuring your progress by how others respond to it, not how it actually feels to live through it. Imagine a seed trying to grow while constantly being dug up and shown to the world. It won't last. It needs darkness, stillness, time. So maybe your version of healing isn't meant to be seen right now. Maybe your growth needs space, not eyes. Maybe the most powerful thing you can do is stay silent, stay focused, and let the results do the talking when they're ready. Because when the change is real, people will notice. Not because you shouted it, but because you lived it. Think about the people you respect most, the ones who carry themselves with quiet confidence. They're not the loudest. They're not constantly explaining who they are or what they're working on. They just show up, and something about their presence makes you pause. That's power. That's what happens when you build yourself in private. Daniel didn't disappear because he was broken. He disappeared because he was under construction. He knew he had to get quiet to get clear. And when he came back, he wasn't the same man. He didn't need to say a word for people to feel the difference. So if you're in a season of rebuilding, of healing, of changing who you are, give yourself permission to go silent. Let the work happen without an audience. Let your actions build the proof. Let your peace speak louder than your posts ever could. You don't need to convince anyone you're becoming better. You just need to become it. As Epictetus said, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Your job is not to perform your growth. Your job is to live it, with so much truth and intention that it echoes in every room you enter. Even if you never say a word. Lesson 2. Your words don't just describe. They define you. Karen used to say it all the time, usually with a laugh, often in front of friends. I'm such a mess. Or total disaster. That's me. It became a part of her identity, a reflex. Whenever she was late, whenever she forgot something, or whenever life got overwhelming, there it was again. I'm a train wreck. At first it sounded harmless. Just self-deprecating humor, right? Something to lighten the mood. Something to lower the bar, maybe make people feel more comfortable around her. But here's the thing. Over time, she started to believe it. She began showing up to life the way she spoke about herself. Disorganized, insecure, scattered. And worse, the people around her, friends, coworkers, even family, began treating her that way too. Not with malice, but with lowered expectations. They stopped trusting her with important things. They stopped looking to her for leadership. They started silently agreeing with the story she kept telling out loud. And that's when it hit her. Her words weren't just commentary, they were construction. Sentence by sentence, she had been building the version of herself that now felt hard to escape. There's a powerful truth here. What you repeatedly say about yourself eventually becomes the reality you live in. Even if it started as a joke, even if you didn't mean it, your words don't just describe, as we say, they define. The Stoics were deeply aware of this. Epictetus warned that language isn't something to be used carelessly. He said, first learn the meaning of what you say and then speak. Because the words you choose create the lens through which you see yourself and the lens through which others see you. And if you constantly speak from a place of limitation, weakness, or shame, don't be surprised when life starts treating you that way. Think about it. If every time you meet someone new, you say things like, I'm terrible with money, or I'm horrible at relationships, or I always mess things up, what are you doing? You're not just sharing facts. You're reinforcing a narrative. You're planting an expectation in your own mind and in theirs. And sooner or later, you start living down to that story instead of rising above it. Now, this doesn't mean we should lie to ourselves or pretend we're perfect. That's not Stoicism. The Stoics never said, say nice things just to feel better. What they taught is that your words should serve your growth, not your ego. They should reflect effort, direction, and integrity, not pity, blame, or emotional laziness. Marcus Aurelius journaled nightly not to flatter himself, but to align his thoughts, to stay honest, and to speak with intention. He knew that careless language creates careless living, and modern psychology agrees. Numerous studies show that the language we use in our self-talk, those internal dialogues, affects our motivation, our confidence, even our physical health. People who speak about themselves with hope, responsibility, and clarity are more resilient under pressure. Not because they're better people, but because their language shapes their mindset. So here's a question for you. What stories are you telling about yourself out loud or in silence? Are you constantly labeling yourself with things you'd never say to someone you love? If you caught a friend calling themselves a burden, a failure, or unlovable, what would you say? You'd step in, you'd correct them, you'd remind them of who they really are. So why not offer yourself the same correction? Instead of saying, I always mess this up, try, I'm learning. I didn't get it right this time, but I'm improving. That might sound small, but it's the kind of shift that changes how your brain sees the challenge in front of you and how it sees your ability to rise. Instead of saying, I'm broken, say, I've been through things, but I'm still here. That's not denial. That's dignity. This isn't about fluff. It's about power. Your power. The one you slowly give away when you don't pay attention to how you speak about yourself. And remember, the world is listening too. Not just people, but life itself, your energy, your habits, your focus. They all take shape according to the story you keep telling. So the next time you feel tempted to speak from self-doubt, pause. Ask yourself, is this true? Is this useful? Is this the story I want to live? Then change the line. Change the script. Build a version of yourself that you're proud to step into and speak like someone becoming that person. Because in the end, the story that defines your life might just be the one you keep repeating in your own voice. Choose that voice wisely. Lesson 3. Actions speak louder than explanations. Mark had always been that guy. The guy with ideas. The guy with ambition. The guy who, at every dinner party or casual conversation, would say something like, one day I'm gonna launch my own business. Or, I've got this idea for a brand, just waiting for the right time. People nodded, smiled, encouraged him. Year after year, he talked about entrepreneurship like it was a destiny waiting for the right alignment. He had vision boards, notebooks filled with plans, even a logo designed years before anything real had started. But nothing ever really happened. Until one day he went quiet. No more big declarations. No more someday talk. No more conversations about what he was going to build. Just silence. 6 months later, someone stumbled across a small Etsy store online. It was clean, professional, and selling handcrafted leather wallets. The store had dozens of 5-star reviews and orders shipping nationwide. It was Mark's. He hadn't announced it. He hadn't posted about it. He hadn't messaged old friends to promote it. He just did the work. He didn't need to say anything. His actions spoke for him. And honestly, that spoke louder than any motivational quote ever could. Epictetus said, "It is not words that make a man great, but actions." That line could have been written yesterday and still hit just as hard. Because in a world where everyone talks, the rarest thing is someone who simply does. Let's be real, it's easy to say you're going to change, to say you're committed, to say this time it's different. But words are cheap when they aren't backed by behavior. And deep down, we all know that. The problem is, talking gives us a false sense of accomplishment. Science backs this up. Studies show that when we announce our goals to others, we get a psychological reward. Dopamine kicks in, We feel like we've already done something important, but we haven't. We've just tricked our brain into feeling progress when no progress has been made. It's like setting your Jeeps, telling everyone where you're headed, and then never leaving the driveway. That's the danger of too many promises and not enough movement. Eventually, people stop listening, not because they don't care, but because there's no reason to believe you anymore. And worse than losing their trust is losing your own. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you chip away at your self-respect. You create a gap between who you say you are and who you're actually becoming. And that gap gets heavy. You start to feel like a fraud, even if no one's calling you out, because your integrity knows the truth. But here's the good news. It's never too late to stop talking and start doing. You don't need to delete your past promises. You don't need to make a grand announcement. All you need to do is act. Quietly, consistently, intentionally. Maybe it's waking up early to write. Maybe it's going for that walk instead of binge watching another series. Maybe it's spending less time planning and more time executing. Small actions, done daily, without fanfare, because the Stoics didn't need applause to live with purpose. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, wrote pages of private reflections every night, not for the world, but for himself, to stay honest, to stay grounded. He didn't spend his life explaining his philosophy, he embodied it. That's the bar, and it's within reach for any of us. Look around today. Everyone's performing online, at work, even in personal conversations. There's this pressure to prove yourself in real time, to show your growth in public, in perfect lighting with carefully chosen words. But you don't have to play that game. You can choose to build in silence. You can choose to let your habits be louder than your hashtags. You can choose to let the results speak when they're ready, on your terms, in your time. Because the people who matter will notice, and the people who don't, they were never paying attention for the right reasons anyway. So here's a simple shift to try. Next time you feel the urge to talk about what you're going to do, pause. And instead of saying it, just take one small step toward doing it. Let your life say it for you. And when someone eventually asks, "Hey, something's different about you," smile. That's your moment. That's when you'll know your actions are finally speaking the truth you once tried so hard to explain. And that, my friend, is a story worth living. Lesson 4. Some battles can only be won in silence. Liam sat at his desk, staring at the glowing screen like he had for years. Same fluorescent lights, same meaningless emails, same tension in his shoulders every time his boss entered the room. He wasn't being screamed at. He wasn't being physically harmed. But slowly over time, the workplace had become toxic, emotionally draining, spiritually hollow. Colleagues whispered behind backs. Managers played favorites. Recognition was rare. Blame was abundant. Every day, Liam left the office feeling smaller than when he walked in. But he stayed, like many of us do, because of the paycheck, because of fear, because it felt safer to endure the familiar pain than to face the unknown. Then one day, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final straw, no explosion, just a quiet internal knowing. I can't keep doing this to myself. But here's what made Liam different. He didn't post a rant on LinkedIn. He didn't email a scathing resignation letter. He didn't try to convince anyone he was right or that the company was wrong. He simply left. Quietly, calmly, with dignity. He gave his notice, packed his things, and walked away. Not just from a bomb, but from a war that could never be won by fighting louder. That's the thing about certain battles. They aren't meant to be fought with words or noise. Some victories are quiet. Some healing happens off stage. And sometimes the strongest move you can make is to walk away in silence. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And that's exactly what Liam lived. He didn't become bitter. He didn't try to expose anyone. He chose a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need validation or applause. He spent the next year rebuilding. He worked part-time jobs, took online courses, and started freelancing. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. But it was honest. Slowly, day by day, he designed a life that didn't drain him. And one morning over coffee, a friend asked him, "Wait, weren't you at that big tech firm? What happened?" Liam just smiled. "I outgrew it." No drama, no details, just truth. In a world obsessed with proving, explaining, and broadcasting every step of our journey, there's something deeply powerful about choosing silence, about knowing you don't owe anyone your pain. You don't need to perform your transformation. Sometimes the most stoic act is to simply exit the arena and refuse to throw another punch in a fight that only makes you smaller. This applies far beyond the workplace. It's the friend who constantly belittles you, but you stay, hoping they'll change. It's the family member who weaponizes guilt, but you keep the peace by sacrificing your own. It's the partner who drains your energy, but you keep explaining your worth, hoping one day they'll hear you. But what if the answer isn't in louder explanations? What if the path forward is silence? Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of strength, of walking away not because you gave up, but because you finally remembered what you deserve. Epictetus taught, if people speak badly of you and it's true, fix yourself. If it's false, laugh. Liam didn't fix others. He didn't waste years trying to make the system fair. He chose to become someone so grounded, so self-directed, that the noise no longer mattered. That is Stoicism in action. You don't need to match energy with energy. You don't need to yell louder to be heard. And you don't need to justify your healing to people who benefit from your wounds. Some of the most profound chapters in your life will be written in silence. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything is. Silently leaving a toxic space, silently committing to your values, silently becoming someone you no longer recognize in the best way possible. So if you're in a situation that's slowly unraveling you, ask yourself, is this a battle I truly need to fight? Or is this a moment to let go, to leave, to rise without a word? Because true power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks away with peace in its chest and fire in its soul. And that, my friend, is a victory only the strong will ever understand. Lesson 5, not everyone deserves your trust. There's a quiet pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't leave bruises. It doesn't show up in hospital reports. But it leaves something deeper. Disappointment in your gut, and a lesson that rewires the way you see the world. That's what happened to Emily. She wasn't naive. She wasn't weak. She was just human. One afternoon, after weeks of anxiety quietly piling up like dust on a forgotten shelf, she opened up to a colleague. They were sitting in the break room sipping coffee. It seemed like a safe space, harmless. She spoke about her recent panic attacks, how she had trouble sleeping, how even showing up for work felt like a silent war. Her colleague nodded, even leaned in, eyes soft, voice reassuring. Thanks for trusting me. But 3 days later, that trust shattered. Whispers, side glances, A question from someone she'd never told. Are you okay? I heard you've been having issues? Her heart sank. It wasn't just betrayal, it was exposure. The most vulnerable parts of her story were now office gossip. She wasn't seen as brave or honest. She was labeled unstable, fragile. Suddenly, projects were reassigned, invitations to meetings disappeared, and all because she trusted the wrong person. Seneca once said, "It is safer to avoid trusting than to regret having trusted." At first glance, that might sound harsh, cynical even, but it's not a call to isolation. It's a call to discernment. You see, trust isn't free. It's not something you owe anyone simply because they smile or sit next to you. Trust is earned, slowly, quietly, through consistency, not charm. In the modern world, we're encouraged to open up, to be authentic, to share our truth. And while vulnerability can be powerful, it's not meant for everyone. Not every ear is safe. Not every person is a sanctuary. There is a stoic strength in guarding your inner life, not from paranoia, but from wisdom. Think about it. When was the last time you shared something personal and later wished you hadn't? Maybe it was a dream, a struggle, a private victory, or a quiet failure. You thought they'd understand. Instead, they minimized it, mocked it, or worse, used it against you. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're learning. Emily did too. She didn't shut down. She didn't become cold or bitter. But she learned to pause, to test people before trusting them, to ask herself, does this person have a track record of keeping confidence? Are they consistent or only kind when it benefits them? She stopped mistaking proximity for loyalty. Just because someone is close doesn't mean they care. And just because someone listens doesn't mean they're safe. In Stoic philosophy, discretion is a form of power. It's the ability to hold your own story close, to decide who gets access and who doesn't. That doesn't make you guarded. It makes you sovereign. Trust, when given too freely, becomes a leak. It drains your energy, weakens your boundaries, and gives others a map to your softest places. But trust, when given wisely, becomes a bridge. It connects you to people who nourish, not deplete, who protect, not expose. So how do we move forward? Start with this. Don't confuse being silent with being fake. You don't owe your full truth to every person you meet. Selective silence is not deceit. It's wisdom in motion. Be kind, be compassionate, but be vigilant, because once your privacy is gone, you don't get it back. In time, Emily found people she could trust. A therapist, a mentor, a close friend who didn't flinch when she cried or judge when she doubted herself. These were people who didn't need her pain to feel important. They simply stood beside her, quietly, and in their presence, healing happened. Seneca wasn't telling us to isolate ourselves from humanity. He was reminding us that regret is often the result of unexamined trust. And sometimes the most stoic thing you can do is say nothing. To hold your story close, not because you're ashamed of it, but because you're finally learning who deserves a seat at your inner table. So before you share that secret, that struggle, that spark of hope, ask yourself, will they hold it with care or play with it like fire? Because your peace of mind is sacred, and not everyone deserves the key. Lesson 6. If you do it for yourself, you don't need to announce it. Some of the most powerful changes in life happen without a sound. No declarations, no before and after snapshots. Just small, quiet choices made when no one is paying attention. They don't go viral, they don't trend, but they change everything. Trevor didn't begin his journey with a grand gesture. There was no announcement on social media, no dramatic caption or inspirational montage. It started with a quiet decision in the early morning, before the sun, before the noise, before anyone else was awake. A moment of clarity when he simply realized he couldn't keep living the way he had been. There was no disaster, no public collapse, no rock-bottom story to romanticize. Only exhaustion, a growing discomfort with the version of himself he met each morning in the mirror. The noise in his mind had become louder than any celebration he found in the outside world. So one day he chose to stop drinking. There were no witnesses, no milestones posted, just one sober day, then another, then a string of quiet victories stitched together by his own will. He wasn't seeking applause, he was searching for peace. 2 years passed before someone asked him, "What changed? You seem more present." Trevor just smiled and said, "These days, I choose peace." No need for a speech, no need to explain the details. The transformation was real, and that was enough. Seneca once wrote, "The reward for a good action is having done it." That idea, simple yet profound, captured the essence of Trevor's journey. He didn't need validation. His reward was internal, the quiet pride of honoring himself moment by moment. In today's world, we're taught to document everything, track every workout, post every meal, share every insight, but there's something deeply rebellious and deeply dignified about keeping some things for yourself. When change is real, it doesn't need to be broadcasted. It becomes evident in how you show up. When you chase approval, your sense of progress becomes fragile. It depends on feedback, on likes, on validation from people who may never truly understand your path. But when your motivation is rooted within, when you're doing it for your own integrity, healing, or clarity, it becomes unshakable. Real transformation doesn't beg for recognition. It doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly. It changes how you think, how you respond, how you walk into a room. It's seen in the pause before you react, in the boundaries you protect, in the serenity that follows you. Think about the moments in your life that shaped you most. Chances are they didn't happen in public. They happened in silence, in the lonely hours, in the unseen efforts, the morning runs no one praised, the late night journaling no one read, the difficult conversations you chose to have or not have, the forgiveness you gave when no one was watching. These moments didn't come with applause. They came with clarity, and they became the quiet foundation for the person you are becoming. Trevor's story is about more than sobriety. It's about ownership. It's about claiming your life without needing to explain it to others. He wasn't trying to inspire anyone. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply living differently because he knew he needed to. There's power in that kind of restraint, in choosing silence over spectacle, in letting your actions speak so clearly that words become unnecessary. Interestingly, research in behavioral psychology supports this path. Studies show that announcing your goals prematurely can trick the brain into feeling as if the goal has already been accomplished. That false sense of progress can undermine the very discipline needed to achieve it. Trevor avoided that trap. He focused on the doing, not the telling. Stoic philosophy reminds us that virtue is its own reward. You don't have to convince anyone you're evolving. Your presence will eventually say what your words never could. The shift will become visible not through explanation, but through energy, through how you carry yourself, through the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to be seen to know their worth. If you're currently walking a path of quiet transformation, know that you are not alone. Growth doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. Some of the most profound revolutions happen in silence, and the peace you're building, day by day, will become a light that others notice, whether you talk about it or not. Lesson 7. Don't turn your healing journey into a performance. Rachel used to share everything. Each detail of her self-love journey was broadcasted to the world. Smoothie bowls, meditation streaks, emotional captions about healing past wounds. People applauded her bravery. They called her raw, open, honest. She felt empowered by it, seen, validated. Until one day something broke, not inside her, but around her. A relationship she had openly celebrated online came crashing down. Suddenly, it wasn't just a breakup, it was a public unraveling. Everyone had something to say. Some offered sympathy, others speculated, a few quietly judged. And in that storm of opinions, Rachel realized something sobering. She had made her healing a show, one where the audience clapped, cried, and commented, while she remained stuck in the same cycle. It wasn't healing, it was performance. That's when she made a decision. No more updates, no more declarations, just stillness. She deleted the draft she'd written. She stopped checking her notifications. And for the first time in a long time, she let the healing be private, personal, real. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What you hear, what you see, what you say, it all shapes you." And Rachel began to understand how deeply true that was. Her words weren't just shaping her online persona, they were shaping her self-concept. Each caption had become a script, each story a role to maintain. She wasn't just talking about growth, she was trying to look like growth, and that illusion had replaced the actual inner work. But when she chose silence, everything shifted. She stopped performing pain. She sat with it. She journaled without needing to post a photo. She cried, not for anyone to see, but because the tears needed space. She forgave quietly. She let go without needing public recognition. And in that quiet, something sacred began to happen. She started to actually feel better. Not because someone clicked a like button, but because she began returning to herself. There's a dangerous myth in modern culture that healing must be visible to be valid. That you need to document every step, prove that you are rising, that you're thriving after trauma. But healing is not theater. It is not a 3-act play with applause breaks. When you turn your healing into content, it stops being healing. It becomes branding. You curate the parts that look good and hide the ones that don't fit the narrative. You rush to get better so you can post about it. And in doing so, you bypass the parts of healing that are messy, nonlinear, and deeply human. Stoicism teaches us to turn inward, to value depth over display, to cultivate a strength that doesn't scream for attention but emanates from within. Real healing doesn't demand a stage. And when you're truly committed to inner peace, you don't need to prove it. Your energy shifts, your boundaries sharpen, you become quieter, not out of secrecy, but out of strength. Rachel's transformation became noticeable, not through her posts, but through her presence. Friends started commenting on how grounded she felt. Her laughter returned, not performative, but deep. She no longer talked about being on a journey. She was simply living differently. A close friend once asked, "Are you still working on loving yourself?" Rachel smiled, paused, and replied, "No, I already do." That answer said everything. No hashtags, no filters, just peace. And here's the truth. People can sense when you've done the work. You don't need to broadcast it. The way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the way you don't speak, it all becomes evidence of your evolution. Marcus Aurelius was right. What you consume, what you say, what you repeat, these things shape your inner world. So be careful what you share, not out of fear, but out of reverence. There's a kind of power that lives in the quiet, a dignity that doesn't need approval, a healing that happens, not because the world watches, but because you finally listen to yourself. If you're healing, let it be real. Let it be slow. Let it be sacred. Let it be yours. You don't need the world to clap. You just need to keep going. Lesson 8, strategic silence is not weakness. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from fear, but from power. Noah had always been the calm one in his family, but being calm doesn't mean you're not affected. Over the years, he had sat through more arguments than he could count. Holiday dinners that turned into battlegrounds, conversations that became accusations, voices that grew louder just to silence him. He used to argue back. He thought standing his ground meant raising his voice. That being strong meant proving your point. But no matter how loud he got, it never changed anything. It only left him feeling drained, like he had lost something each time he fought to be heard. Then came a night that changed everything. It was supposed to be a simple conversation about a small disagreement with his father. But as usual, old wounds were reopened. Words turned sharp, tones turned bitter. His father said something cruel, not in anger, but with intent. A sentence designed to cut deep. Noah didn't react. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He stood up and quietly left the room. No slamming doors, no dramatic exit, just silence. His absence was louder than any argument he could have made. A week later, he received a message from his father, just a few words. "I've been thinking a lot about what you didn't say." That was the moment Noah realized sometimes silence shakes people more than shouting ever could. Epictetus once said, "If people speak badly of you and it's true, fix yourself. If it's false, laugh." The wisdom behind that is profound. You don't always need to defend your character. If it's true, you grow. If it's false, you let it pass. Either way, your energy stays intact. Strategic silence isn't about avoidance. It's about choosing your peace over pointless conflict. It's about recognizing that not every accusation deserves a rebuttal. Not every insult requires your attention. And not every battlefield is worth stepping onto. In a world obsessed with reaction, restraint looks like weakness. But it's not. It's strength, disciplined, deliberate, and deeply rooted. Because anyone can speak, anyone can yell, but to remain calm when provoked, to walk away without needing the last word, that requires a level of mastery most never reach. Think about the last time someone tried to provoke you. Maybe they criticized you unfairly, or tried to bait you into a fight. Maybe they twisted your words or questioned your integrity, and you felt that heat rise in your chest, that urge to respond, to defend, to prove. What if instead you just didn't? What if you let their words float in the air and fall flat, unanswered? What if you allowed your silence to become your shield? You see, when you engage in every conflict, you dilute your power. But when you reserve your voice for what truly matters, people begin to notice. Your words carry weight, not because they're frequent, but because they're rare. This doesn't mean you should be passive or never speak up. Stoicism doesn't teach suppression. It teaches discernment. You choose when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Strategic silence is not about bottling up your emotions. It's about not letting others dictate your reactions. It's a form of emotional independence. It's what allows you to stay composed in chaos, to respond instead of react. Noah's silence didn't come from defeat. It came from strength. It forced his father to sit with his own words, to face the echo of what he had said without Noah absorbing the blow. That's the power of walking away, not to abandon the people you love, but to give them space to reflect and to give yourself space to protect your dignity. Silence, when used with wisdom, becomes a message, a mirror, a pause that invites reflection. And often it says, more than any speech could, if you've ever chosen to remain quiet when you could have lashed out, if you've ever walked away from chaos instead of fueling it, you're not weak, you're not avoiding. You're practicing a rare kind of strength, one that doesn't need validation, one that doesn't rely on being right, one that simply says, I value my peace more than your provocation. So next time you feel pulled into a fight that doesn't serve your soul, remember Noah. Remember the power of what you don't say. And know this, silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the ultimate form of self-respect. Lesson 9, change the story you tell yourself. There was a time when Olivia would look at herself in the mirror and say, I'm not good at this. It didn't matter what this was, speaking up at meetings, learning a new skill, or even asking for help. That was her default script. Quiet, automatic, unchallenged. And every time she said it, it grew stronger. Not because it was true, but because it was familiar. But something shifted one day. Something quiet but irreversible. She had just stumbled through a difficult presentation at work. Her slides froze, her voice cracked, and when it was over, she sat in her car feeling that old shame creep in. The words almost came, I'm just not cut out for this. But this time she paused. She placed her hands on the wheel, took a slow breath, and whispered something different. I'm learning. 3 small words, and everything changed. Because the words we say to ourselves shape the world we experience. They become the lens we look through, the path we walk, and eventually, the life we live. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, the happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. Olivia was beginning to realize her thoughts weren't facts. They were habits, and habits can be changed. We all carry stories inside us, narratives we picked up from childhood, from criticism, from failure. I always mess things up. I'm not attractive enough. I'm too old to start over. These aren't just thoughts, they're cages, invisible ones. And every time we repeat them, we reinforce the bars. But here's the good news. Stories can be rewritten. Instead of saying, I'm terrible at this, you say, I'm working on it. Instead of, I always fail, you say, I've failed before and I've learned. Instead of, I can't, you say, I haven't yet. Same life, same situation, but a completely different trajectory. Because the story changes your approach, and your approach changes your outcome. Olivia didn't become a master presenter overnight. But she stopped hiding. She stopped tearing herself down before anyone else had a chance to. And that made all the difference. Every time she chose kinder language, she softened the path beneath her feet. Each word became a stepping stone, not a stumbling block. This is the core of Stoic practice. Not denying difficulty, but choosing how we interpret it. Not pretending everything's fine, but refusing to be crushed by our own narration. The Stoics believed in controlling what we can control, and our self-talk is one of those things. You can't control the world, but you can control your response. And your response begins with your internal language. Think about it. How many times have you talked yourself out of something before you even tried? How often have you been your own worst critic, speaking to yourself in ways you'd never speak to a friend? Would you tell a child, you'll never be good enough? Would you tell a friend, you always screw things up? Of course not. Then why say it to yourself? You deserve the same grace, the same patience, the same belief you offer others. Try this. The next time you mess up, listen carefully to your internal reaction. Then ask, is this thought helping me grow or is it holding me back? If it's the latter, challenge it. Replace it. One thought won't change your life, but the practice of choosing better thoughts over days, months, years absolutely will. And there's neuroscience behind it. Studies show that repeated thoughts literally rewire our brain pathways. The more often you think, I'm capable, the easier it becomes to believe it. You carve a new mental trail, and with time, it becomes the one your mind naturally walks. Olivia didn't just change her words, she changed her identity, not overnight, not perfectly, but persistently. And so can you. This isn't about fake positivity. It's not about ignoring pain or pretending to be confident. It's about planting better seeds, seeds of resilience, of hope, of possibility. Because when you change the story you tell yourself, you change the way you show up in the world. You take risks. You set boundaries. You rise after falling, not because it's easy, but because your new story says you can. And people will notice, not because you announced it, but because your presence has changed. You carry yourself differently. You speak with a new calm, a quiet self-respect. That's the power of a better narrative. So ask yourself today, what story have I been telling myself? And what story do I want to live instead? You don't need permission to begin again. You just need to speak to yourself like someone worth believing in, because you are. And when that story becomes your new truth, the world around you begins to shift too, not through magic, but through mindset. And that's where everything begins. Lesson 10. If you live for the applause, you'll burn out. Jacob used to thrive on approval. He wouldn't admit it out loud, of course, but deep down his energy came from being seen, being liked, followed, applauded. Every post he shared, every achievement he made, came with a silent hope. I hope they notice. I hope this lands. I hope it gets the likes. For a while it worked. The feedback loop rewarded him. A well-written thought got claps. A well-filtered photo got hearts. And he felt motivated, validated, inspired to keep going. But then the algorithm changed. Engagement dropped. The applause slowed. And so did Jacob. He didn't quit right away, but he began to feel hollow. The joy of the work faded. The spark that once lit his mornings dimmed. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was that he didn't feel seen anymore. And because he had tied his motivation to being seen, once the crowd got quiet, so did his drive. That was his wake-up call. He realized, if your fire depends on the noise of the crowd, your fire will flicker with every silence. And silence always comes. The Stoic Marcus Aurelius once said, do every act of your life as if it were your last. He didn't mean to live recklessly or in fear, but to act with purpose, not performance, not for show but for truth. Jacob began to ask himself, what would I still do even if no one was watching? It's a hard question, but a freeing one. Many of us don't even realize how deeply wired we are for external validation. We check our phones for feedback before we check in with ourselves. We let algorithms guide our worth, and slowly, we begin to live a version of life that's tailored for applause, but disconnected from our inner compass. And here's the danger. If you live for the applause, you'll burn out, because applause is inconsistent. It's conditional. It depends on trends, timing, and things beyond your control. But if you live from a place of inner alignment, you become unstoppable, because your fuel comes from within. Jacob began to create again, but this time for different reasons. He stopped posting every small win. He stopped chasing what performed well. Instead, he focused on what mattered to him. He reconnected with his craft, not for the spotlight, but for the substance. And something strange happened. The fewer people he tried to impress, the more authentic his work became. And ironically, that authenticity drew people in, quietly, steadily, genuinely. But even if it hadn't, he was okay, because the goal was no longer applause. The goal was peace. Ask yourself this: would you still pursue your dream if no one ever gave you a trophy? Would you still write, build, teach, heal if no one clapped? If the answer is no, it's time to revisit your why. If the answer is yes, then you've found something worth holding on to. In Stoicism, there is a deep reverence for intrinsic motivation. Doing what's right because it's right, not because it's recognized, not because it's rewarded, but because it aligns with virtue, with character, with who you're becoming. It's easy to say, much harder to live, because modern life whispers the opposite. Be liked, be seen, go viral, stay relevant. But the Stoics offer another path, one where meaning replaces metrics and clarity replaces clout. Jacob now starts his days differently, no longer wondering what will impress people, but asking instead, what brings me closer to who I want to be? And that shift has changed everything. So here's a truth worth holding. If your actions only exist when others are watching, you're living a performance. But when your actions continue in silence, in the quiet, in the dark, when no one is there to cheer, you've found discipline. You've found integrity. The world will forget your likes, but you won't forget who you became. And if you're feeling unseen right now, if your efforts are going unnoticed, I want you to know your value doesn't disappear just because others can't see it. Keep showing up, not for the claps, but for the calling. Because in the end, it's not the applause that makes you strong. It's the work you keep doing long after the crowd is gone. That's where your strength lives. That's where your fire stays lit. And that kind of fire, the one that doesn't need an audience, that's the one that never burns out. Lesson 11, the rare power of listening. Ava used to be the kind of person who always had something to say, not because she was rude, not because she lacked empathy, but because, like so many of us, she believed that conversations were about responding, adding something, proving a point, sharing her story. When someone opened up, she'd jump in with advice, or worse, an example of her own. She thought she was helping. She thought she was connecting. But one day during a long conversation with her friend Mia, who had just lost her job, gone through a breakup, and was drowning in uncertainty, Ava spoke too soon. She tried to fix it, offer silver linings, drop motivational quotes, and Mia, clearly exhausted, looked at her and said softly, "I just needed you to listen." That moment landed hard, because Ava realized she hadn't really been listening at all. She had been waiting to speak. It was the beginning of a quiet shift. She started paying attention to how often people talk without really hearing. How often we nod, smile, even maintain eye contact, while our minds are already rehearsing what we'll say next. She remembered a quote by Epictetus: "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." It sounds simple, almost childlike, but it's profoundly Stoic. Because true listening, deep, present, ego-free listening, is rare. And in a world full of noise, it's nothing short of a superpower. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you, not interrupted, not judged, not rushed, just held space for you. How did that feel? Now ask yourself, when was the last time you gave that kind of space to someone else? We live in an era of loudness. Everyone wants to be heard. Everyone's broadcasting, podcasting, posting. But who's actually listening? Began practicing silence in her conversations. Not as a passive act, but as an intentional one. She asked fewer questions, gave people more time to think. Instead of jumping in with stories, she stayed curious. Instead of assuming, she clarified. And slowly, something shifted. Her relationships deepened. People started opening up more. They trusted her, not because she had all the answers, but because she gave them room to find their own. She wasn't performing empathy, she was embodying it. Listening isn't just a skill, it's a form of service. It says, "I see you, I hear you, you matter." The Stoics valued restraint in speech. They believed that talking less and observing more leads to wisdom. Because when you stop trying to be the most interesting person in the room, you become the most interested, and that's far more powerful. This isn't just philosophy, it's neuroscience too. When someone feels heard, their nervous system calms, their guard lowers, trust is built, healing begins. And none of that requires you to say the perfect thing. It just requires you to be present. One of the most radical things you can do in a world full of noise is offer quiet understanding. So how do we cultivate this superpower? First, slow down. Let people finish their sentences. You'd be surprised how often we interrupt without realizing it, thinking we're helping, when really, we're stealing space. Second, drop the agenda. Don't listen just to reply. Listen to understand. Listen with curiosity, not judgment. Don't try to fix, just witness. Third, embrace the pause. Silence isn't awkward, it's honest. Let it breathe. And finally, remember that not every story needs your story in return. Sometimes the greatest gift you can offer is your full, undivided attention. Ava's transformation wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement. No, "I'm working on being a better listener" post, just a quiet shift, one conversation at a time. And that's the beauty of it. Listening doesn't make headlines, but it changes lives. So if you want to build stronger relationships, deeper trust, and a calmer presence, start here. Close your mouth. Open your heart. Listen like it matters, because it does. In a world where everyone is speaking, the one who listens will always stand out. Lesson 12. Quiet habits, loud results. Mason didn't start with a New Year's resolution or a 90-day transformation challenge. He didn't post a photo of his first push-ups or hashtag grind mode under a sweaty gym selfie. There was no announcement, no audience, no public declaration of change. He simply woke up one ordinary morning, looked at himself in the mirror, and knew something had to shift. Not just his body, not just his routine, but something much deeper, his relationship with discipline, with showing up for himself, especially when no one else was watching. So he made a small, quiet promise, 15 push-ups every morning, no matter what. No gym membership, no accountability group. Just 15 push-ups between his bed and the bathroom floor. Rain or shine, tired or rested, stressed or calm, no excuse, no exceptions. It felt small, insignificant even. But that was the point. He didn't want to impress anyone. He wanted to build something real. 1 week turned into 2, then into a month, then a year. Over time, it became less about push-ups and more about what they represented: consistency, self-respect, and silent momentum. He was no longer just exercising his body, he was exercising his will. 2 years later, Mason didn't just look stronger, he carried himself differently. Straighter posture, calmer voice, clearer eyes. When someone finally asked, "You've changed, what's your secret?" he simply replied, "I kept a promise to myself every morning." That was it. No fancy formula, no breakthrough moment, just quiet effort, repeated endlessly. Seneca once said, "True glory consists in doing what deserves to be written and writing what deserves to be read." Mason wasn't looking for glory. He wasn't trying to become a story. But by choosing discipline over drama, he became someone worth noticing, without trying to be noticed. In our world of highlights and hashtags, we're conditioned to believe that transformation must be visible to be real. But the Stoics knew better. They understood that what happens behind closed doors is often more powerful than what's displayed on stage. Real growth doesn't shout, it whispers. It happens in the quiet moments of decision, when you choose to rise instead of roll over, to act instead of delay, to build instead of complain. These silent choices are easy to overlook because they don't feel dramatic. But over time, they stack up. They create new patterns, new identities. And before you know it, you're not the same person who started. Think about your own life. What are the habits no one sees that shape who you're becoming? The morning walks, the journaling, the moments you take a breath before reacting, the way you choose presence over distraction. These aren't Instagram-worthy, but they are identity-worthy. The truth is, when your actions are born in silence, they carry a different kind of power. They don't feed the ego, they feed the soul. That's why private victories matter so much. They remind you that your word to yourself is sacred, that you can be trusted, that you don't need an audience to do what's right. Even modern psychology echoes this truth. Studies show that when we talk too much about our goals, we often experience a false sense of accomplishment. It tricks the brain into thinking the work is done when it hasn't even begun. But when we act without broadcasting, we conserve our energy for what actually matters, doing the work. That's what Mason did, and it changed everything. Not because of the push-ups, but because of the mindset. He trained himself to follow through, even when no one clapped, even when it felt boring, even when it would have been easier to quit. And the result? A life built on quiet integrity. So if you're doing something small right now, writing 1 page a day, meditating for 5 minutes, drinking more water, walking every evening, keep going. Even if no one notices, especially if no one notices, because the loudest results often come from the quietest habits. The change won't show up overnight, but one day people will feel something different in your presence. They won't know what you did, but they'll know you've done the work, and you won't need to explain. You'll just smile. Because when you build in silence, the results will speak for themselves. That's the Stoic way. Quiet action, deep roots, steady growth. Lesson 13. Not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. Ella used to be the life of the party, always out, always saying yes, always surrounded by people. But somewhere between the endless conversations in crowded rooms, she began to feel hollow, like she was giving parts of herself away, one smile at a time. Then came a quiet shift. She stopped going out every weekend. She turned off notifications. She took long walks alone without sharing them online. She started journaling, reading, and sitting in silence. Not because she was turned them, but because she was finally listening to herself. And that's when the comments started. You've changed. You are no fun anymore. Why are you acting so weird? At first, those words stung. It's hard being misunderstood, especially by people who once called you a friend. But the more Ella resisted the need to explain, the freer she felt. She wasn't retreating. She was realigning. And here's the thing, when you begin choosing peace over noise, solitude over approval, and growth over validation, people won't always understand, and that's okay. Epictetus once said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. It sounds harsh, but it's actually liberating. Because true growth often looks like regression to those who are still running in circles. We live in a world where being seen is treated as proof of being alive. But presence isn't the same as alignment, and popularity is not the same as peace. There will be seasons where your decisions confuse others, when your healing looks like distance, when your boundaries feel like rejection, when your silence is mistaken for coldness. But growth is rarely loud, and peace doesn't ask for permission. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint people who expected you to stay the same. Think about it. How many times have you dimmed your truth just to fit in? How often have you laughed at jokes that made you uncomfortable, agreed to plans you didn't want, or stayed in rooms that drained your spirit? Stoicism teaches us not to be ruled by external opinions. Your worth isn't measured by how well you're understood. It's measured by how deeply you understand yourself. Ella didn't owe anyone an explanation. She didn't hold a press conference about her transformation. She just kept walking her quiet path. Some friendships faded. Some conversations grew awkward. But something deeper took root. Inner steadiness. 2 years later, one of those old friends messaged her out of the blue. Hey, you seem really grounded lately, like calm. What changed? Ella smiled because that same friend once called her boring for skipping a night out. Now they were asking for advice. This is what often happens. The people who once mocked your stillness eventually come seeking your stability because the world is loud, people are exhausted, and your peace becomes magnetic. But here's the truth, not everyone will return. Not every relationship will survive your evolution. And that's part of the price of becoming who you were meant to be. Growth invites solitude. Clarity creates distance. And sometimes elevation requires separation. You can't take everyone with you. Some people are only comfortable with the version of you that didn't have boundaries, that didn't question, didn't reflect, didn't pause. Let them go. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. Even in nature, when a snake outgrows its skin, it must shed it completely. The old layer can't stretch to contain the new life. That's not rejection, it's renewal. So if you are walking a quiet path right now, making choices others don't get, setting boundaries that feel uncomfortable, or living a life that looks unfamiliar, don't shrink. Don't apologize for becoming more of who you are. The world doesn't need more copies. It needs more courage. And sometimes that courage looks like walking alone for a while, trusting that your peace is worth more than their approval. Remember, you are not obligated to be understood. You are not here to meet expectations you never agreed to. You are here to live aligned with truth, with purpose, with presence. So let the misunderstanding happen. Let them talk. And while they do, keep growing. Because one day your quiet transformation will speak louder than any explanation ever could. And those who once doubted you will ask how you did it. You won't need to say a word. Your life will be the answer. Lesson 4. The world is too loud. You can't even hear yourself think. Tyler didn't think he had a problem. He wasn't addicted to anything, at least not in the traditional sense. But every morning started the same. Wake up, reach for his phone, scroll through notifications, check messages, peek at the news, and lose 45 minutes before his feet even touched the ground. He thought this was normal. Everyone does it, right? But over time, Tyler noticed something strange. He felt constantly anxious, restless, like his mind was always running but never going anywhere. His thoughts weren't his own, his focus fractured, his peace gone. So one morning, in a quiet act of rebellion, he turned it all off. No fanfare, no "I'm taking a break" post, just silence. He deleted Instagram, logged out of Twitter, muted his email, turned off every single notification on his phone. For 30 days, he stepped off the digital stage and into his own mind. The first few days were hard. His thumbs reached for apps that were no longer there. He felt a phantom buzzing in his pocket. He worried, am I missing something? Am I falling behind? But around day 10, something shifted. He began to hear himself again. Not the version of himself curated for public approval, but his real inner voice. The quiet one that used to speak in the space between moments. The one that whispered truths before the noise drowned them out. He realized he wasn't burnt out from life. He was burnt out from the volume of it. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Don't waste time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one man." But how do you become anything when you can't even hear your own thoughts long enough to reflect? We live in a world where noise is constant and stillness is rare, where every spare second is filled with updates, ads, reels, and replies, where boredom is seen as failure and silence as absence. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. It reminds us that clarity doesn't come from more input. It comes from subtraction, from peeling away the layers of distraction until you're left with something honest. Your values, your intentions, your presence. When was the last time you sat in complete silence? No music, no screen, no background hum, just you and your breath? Most people can't remember. And yet, that's where the answers hide. In the quiet, in the discomfort. In the moments when your mind isn't reacting but simply being. Tyler's experiment wasn't about quitting social media forever. It was about reclaiming his awareness. And in that space, he rediscovered something priceless: mental sovereignty. He found himself journaling again, reading longer, thinking deeper. He started having actual conversations instead of comment threads. He noticed his anxiety lessen, his sleep improve, his sense of time return, and perhaps most importantly, he realized he didn't need constant updates to be in life. He could just live it. The truth is, the modern world profits from your distraction. Your attention is currency, and companies spend billions to capture it. But your peace, that's your most valuable possession, and you give it away every time you scroll without thinking. So ask yourself, who benefits from your scattered mind? Who profits when you can't sit still? And what would happen if you created space to think again? Space to reflect, to ask better questions, to choose your actions instead of reacting to noise. You don't have to disappear forever. But what if you unplug for a weekend or one day a week? What if, before reaching for your phone in the morning, you reached for yourself, your breath, your body, your being? You might be surprised at what you find, because silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. And stillness isn't laziness, it's discipline. It takes courage to step away from the crowd, to not check what everyone else is doing, to not need the constant reassurance of connection. But that courage creates clarity. So if you've been feeling overwhelmed, scattered, or numb, consider this your invitation, not to quit everything, but to begin hearing again, to sit with yourself long enough to remember what your own mind sounds like. Because when the world gets too loud, you don't need more noise. You need a pause. You need presence. And in that quiet space, you might just remember the person you were before the world told you who to be. Your peace isn't found in the feed. It's found in the silence you've been avoiding. Lesson 15. Speak less when angry, act more when calm. Jessica used to believe that silence meant weakness. That if someone hurt you and you didn't respond immediately, you were letting them win. So whenever she felt attacked, disappointed, or misunderstood, she responded instantly with long, emotionally charged messages, paragraphs of hurt, screenshots, voice notes. Her fingers would move faster than her thoughts. And yet, after every outburst, she felt drained, regretful, as if her words had only scattered more noise into an already messy situation. She'd replay the conversations, reread her own messages, and think, that didn't help. That made it worse. Until one day something changed, a simple suggestion from a therapist. Wait 24 hours before you reply when you're angry. At first, it sounded weak, counterintuitive, unfair. Why wait when her emotions were valid? Why delay when the other person deserved to hear how she felt? But she tried it. Someone she deeply cared about sent a message that stung. Her hands itched to type a reply. Her heart was pounding, her chest tight. But she remembered, wait. So she did. She put the phone down, went for a walk, breathed deeply, cried a little, slept on it. The next day when she read the message again, something had shifted. Not because the words were less hurtful, but because she had changed. Her mind wasn't hijacked by adrenaline anymore. Her heart wasn't screaming to be heard. She could finally ask the most important question. What do I actually want from this conversation? And for the first time, the answer wasn't revenge or validation. It was clarity, peace, understanding. Her reply was shorter, kinder, stronger. And more importantly, it didn't feel like she had betrayed herself to protect her pride. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." But what does that mastery look like in real life? It looks like knowing when to pause. It looks like refusing to be a puppet pulled by your emotions. It looks like choosing dignity over drama, even when you're right. Most people assume stoicism means suppressing your emotions, but it doesn't. Stoicism teaches you to observe your emotions, not be ruled by them. To acknowledge anger, but not let it steer the wheel. To feel deeply, but respond wisely. Think about it. How many times have you said something in anger that you later wished you could take back? How many bridges burned with words thrown too fast? In contrast, how many moments of calm gave you insight you couldn't access while emotional? There is power in the pause, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of strategy, a calm rooted in awareness. It's not about pretending nothing affects you. It's about becoming the kind of person who can feel everything and still choose their next move with care. When Jessica began practicing this 24-hour rule regularly, something else happened. People noticed. Her conversations became more thoughtful, her relationships more stable. She stopped feeding the fire and started holding space for resolution. Even at work, she no longer replied to tense emails immediately. She'd draft a reply, let it sit, and then revisit it later with clearer judgment. More often than not, she'd delete half of it and feel lighter for doing so. This didn't make her passive, it made her powerful. Because real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It shows itself in restraint, in discipline, in the quiet refusal to let chaos decide your character. In a culture obsessed with quick reactions, waiting is a radical act, and yet this kind of self-command isn't just stoic, it's deeply human. It honors your nervous system. It protects your values. It gives your better self a chance to show up before your wounded one takes over. So the next time you feel that surge of anger, ask your will speaking now bring clarity or confusion? Am I reacting or responding? Do I want to win the argument or preserve the relationship? And most of all, will I still stand by these words tomorrow? Because here's the truth. Words spoken in anger rarely age well, but silence gives wisdom a chance to arrive. Jessica didn't just save one relationship with that shift. She saved herself from becoming the kind of person who always spoke first and thought later. And in that space between trigger and response, she found something Stoicism has taught for centuries. Freedom doesn't come from getting the last word. It comes from knowing you don't need to. You don't need to explain your growth. You don't need to announce your evolution. You certainly don't owe anyone a highlight reel of your healing. Real transformation doesn't need a stage. It doesn't shout. It doesn't perform. It simply is. And it reveals itself over time in how you carry yourself, in the way you walk into a room, in the energy you radiate, even in silence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Let that sink in. Because the more you talk about what you're becoming, the more you're trying to convince others, and maybe deep down, trying to convince yourself. But when you're truly becoming, you don't need to explain. You don't need to defend your boundaries. You don't need to prove your strength. You don't need to document your every breakthrough. Why? Because the people who matter will feel the shift. And the ones who don't were never really watching with understanding in the first place. We live in a world that trains us to over-explain, to narrate our every move, to prove our worth, to validate our identity through external approval. But the Stoics understood something timeless, that true integrity needs no witnesses. There's a quiet dignity in being okay with not being understood. There's immense strength in making peace with being underestimated. And there's power, undeniable power, in walking your path without waiting for applause. So starting today, what if you chose to live differently? What if instead of posting your next move, you just moved? Instead of declaring your next phase, you just entered it. Instead of talking about your healing, you just healed. That doesn't mean closing yourself off. It means opening up to something deeper. A life built on substance, not noise. On values, not validation. On calm, not chaos. Because here's the truth. Still waters run deep. And when you stop talking so much about who you're becoming, you have more space to actually become it. Look back at the last few years of your life. What was the most important change you made? Was it shouted from the rooftops? Or was it quiet, gradual, so internal that maybe no one noticed until they felt it? That's how real change works. It seeps into your posture, your discipline, your presence. It's in the way you don't overreact anymore, the way you pause instead of panic, the way you listen more than you speak, and the way you choose peace over proving your point. This is not the loud path, but it's the lasting one. So what would happen if you embraced that today? If you practiced stillness in a world that begs for noise? If you cultivated peace in a world addicted to reaction? If you started measuring your progress not by what people see, but by what you feel? That's stoicism in action. It's not about being cold or emotionless. It's about being grounded, present, intentional. It's about choosing your response rather than being dragged by your impulses. And most of all, it's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to be seen to feel valuable, because they know their worth doesn't come from outside. So stop telling everyone what's happening in your life. Live it. Let your peace be louder than your posts. Let your presence speak for you. Let your quiet consistency shape your future. You're not here to impress the crowd. You're here to master yourself. And the world may never throw a parade for that, but one day someone will look at you and wonder what changed. And you won't have to say a word. They'll feel it. And that will be more than enough. So from this moment on, speak less, act more. Say nothing, but live everything. Be a stoic, calm, courageous, unshaken. Because the best version of you isn't explained. It's lived.